Hi guys, welcome to our next unit of study, which is phylum Annelida. And today we're going to be learning about um, their characteristics. So notice that now we are in the development of segmentation. And so these are all protostones. We just study mollusks, which are also protostones. And annelids are also protostones, but they have segmentation. So that's the difference between mollusks and annelids. Remember that we are now in the coelom also. So um, both mollusks and annelids are coelomates, and segmentation means that different parts have specific roles and they're segmented in throughout their systems, so that if one part is harmed, the organism may still be able to survive, right? If it loses a limb or something that is related um, to that. Um, so earthworms involve, annelids involve earthworms, um, polychaetes, and leeches. We're going to discuss all of them a little bit. Polychaetes are marine organisms, and we have one here that you can see. This is called the Christmas tree worm, and that lives in the ocean. And as you can tell, why their name is looks like a Christmas tree, and this is a leech, and this is an earthworm, and I'm gonna be showing you an earthworm that I have here from my garden. Um, some of the characteristics that earthworms have, they the most important part, obviously, of this organism is that they have segments. And so if you notice here, this worm is segmented into, you can see the segments here even from the outside, but internally you can see there is a mouth, there's a brain, the heart, and all of these areas are, you see the coelom here, the space in between this main system and everything else, the digestive tract. The heart is all around it with blood vessels, right, that are transporting the material. But you notice that there's a lot more complexity because things are segmented, right? Like the excretory system organ is here. Now, let's talk about segmentation and asexual reproduction for a moment. It would be a lot more difficult for a segmented organism to just regrow a new part because it's difficult for that part for those cells that are more specialized to be found anywhere else, to have those generative properties, because they can't just replicate from a copy of the cells. They're not that similar. So the word annelid means little rings, and you notice here is there are definitely rings throughout this earthworm. So up here, you notice there's a brain and mouth, and there's the nervous system. So this is where all the information is gathered the sensory information is gathered by the tongue, and then transmitting that information to the brain. Notice there's also an anus, so it's like a one-way excretory digestive system, definitely more complex. Um, and so we have here the segments. They have components, specific jobs that they do, and there's more specialization. Okay, some other characteristics. And movement, in the way that these organisms move, is with the hydrostatic skeleton. So right now I'm gonna jump here and show you my earthworm, and this I gathered from my garden. So a couple of things that I want you to notice. You probably can see the segments pretty well. You see how it's moving and how it's inching forward. So the head is actually here in the going the other way. So I'm gonna move it so that it goes now toward in the opposite direction. So notice how it's trying to figure out um, where it is. It's very wiggly. It's very angry at me right now. Oh, um, but hold on one second here as I gather him. Oh, whoa, what did I do? So notice that here he is figuring out, he's very angry, he's very trying to figure out where he's going. The segments, I don't know if you can tell, but it's very segmented. Let me see if I can get a little more light. There you go. Notice that it's sensing with its tongue where it wants to go, and it's not really sure right now where it's going. One observation is here in the center, you see there's like a fatter section. That's where the reproductive organs are. They're kind of in the middle of the organism. And as it's figuring out where it is, it's going to begin to move. So now look how it moves. It's going to push one section forward, and everything else kind of comes along with it. So as it's moving in one direction, it pushes the water that is inside for the hydroskeleton. It pushes it forward, and it creates pressure. And then it has this little anchorings called the setae that allow it to grasp to where it is, and then it drags everything else with it. Do you guys see that? It's moving the front, and then everything else gets dragged along. As it's dragging, there you get a really good picture of how it's inching, and then it pushes one section, and then it releases the pressure of the water, and then the hydrostatic skeleton goes to the other section of the body. Because it's segmented, it can do that. It can actually section off where the hydrostatic movement is coming from, depending on where it needs to go in the body. You see that it's really angry. You see the segments there. You can see them pretty well, I think, right now, where you can see the little pieces. And I really encourage you to go to your garden, if you're not completely grossed out by this, and go grab a worm. Okay, so some of the things here that you will notice is that it uses that hydrostatic skeleton to make pressure, and it will drag this section of the body with the little setae, which are these little hairs here. It's going to anchor this section wherever it is, and then it's going to push everything else forward to that direction, right? This is the front, so this is the mouth, and you might have seen the mouth there. The muscles contract like the way we spoke before, but because it's segmented, it can like contract muscles individually from one section at a time. And it also has a crop and a gizzard. So the crop is a storage. So when the organism eats, it actually eats all kinds of materials, hard and soft materials. The hard materials stay in the crop. And then when it's done digesting whatever's in the gizzard, which is where that most of the digestion occurs, it leaves that, secretes it to the anus, and the crop, which is a holding tank or a holding area, then the materials that are in the crop move onto the gizzard to then be processed. And it uses its same materials, the hard and the soft materials, to break down whatever is being eaten here. So in terms of digestion, it has really simple digestion in that it doesn't use a lot of chemical breakdown. It uses mechanical breakdown of the materials because it doesn't have teeth, so it pretty much absorbs everything, holds it here, and then when it's ready to process that material, it goes to the gizzard, and its own contractions through mechanical breakdown, and the materials, the soft and hard materials that it uses, is what it uses to process the food. All right. Other characteristics that you want to know. So that I mentioned, that swelling part is the sexual reproduction, is called the clitellum. And in terms of how it, asexual reproduction, it uses fragmentation, but it's actually not very effective. If it fragments, let's say in the wrong section, it could not help it regenerate. Typically, in the area of the brain, it'll have a better chance regenerating the rest of the body because the brain and the head is a more complex, and it'll be able to regenerate more. But if you segment it in certain parts, it may not be able to regenerate. So the clitellum is where the eggs are held, and so basically it secretes the eggs, and it's also eggs or the sperm can be secreted from there. And here's speaking of segmentation. So if it's segmented just right, it may be able to regenerate itself. But in other sections, like if it's segmented here or here, it will have a much more difficult time being able to reproduce. Okay, so why was I holding one? I have, as you guys know, I'm an avid gardener, and I love having these guys around. There's a couple of reasons why. Notice as they tunnel in through the dirt, they cause holes. These holes allow aeration, oxygen and carbon dioxide to be present. And so for organisms like bacteria that use carbon dioxide or plants that use oxygen, these aeration of the earth, making holes in the earth, is actually very beneficial to plants. Here, there's worm castings, which is basically worm poop. And worm castings are important because that poop is the breakdown of organic material that the worm had, and it allows it to be fertilizer for the earth. There's an actual process called vermiculture, and vermiculture is the agriculture with worms. So you could do like a compost pile where you're putting all kinds of material and buy a bunch of worms that actually will break it down and will make the soil very, very, very rich. I have actually a compost pile in my garden where I promote having worms. I don't buy extra worms. I just hope that a lot of worms are present there to break down my things. Another interesting fact about segmented worms is leeches. And leeches, if you don't know, are parasitic. They actually are really, here's an example of how these parasites can actually get into your skin. And here's the mouth of a leech. And this is these little serrated areas is how they climb into you and then drink your blood. And they used to be, used in what they called leech therapy, where they thought that if you use these things, you could actually detox your blood. And now today we know that that's not true. They actually can bring you a lot of diseases because they're parasites. So there's a lot of infection risks when you have leeches. So these medical practices are no longer used. All right. that's everything for today. Now you're going to be watching the dissection on Annelids.